the Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Boundless Authenticity podcast. We're almost at 90 episodes now, and according to the statistics, 68% of listeners across the globe are not subscribed or following the podcast. In order for me to be able to bring you even more of the guests that you want, I need your help. So please hit follow or subscribe on any of your favorite streaming platforms, whether it be Spreaker, Spotify, Apple, Rumble, or YouTube, so that I can continue getting the best interviews for you. Today's return guest is Nathaniel Gillis, who is a paranormal researcher and author of The Skin That Crawls. And today we are unveiling the unseen, connecting the dots between aliens, demons, and the unknown. Now, we've just had a very riveting pre-podcast conversation, so maybe I will go through that and include some of it near the end because, shit just got really hot. So anyways, Nathaniel, how's it going?
It's going good, brother. Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
I gotta ask this question, and I think I've asked you this before, but what is the distinction between demons and other malevolent supernatural beings? Like, are all these entities considered demons, or is there nuances, poltergeist, shadow people, all that stuff?
We could be dealing with partially manifested entities. As far as I'm concerned, my model of phenomenon is not that they're demonic. The data set doesn't point to that. As far as the demonic being a construct, well, so is the extraterrestrial. Matter of fact, we have more evidence of the demonic model than we do of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. We can get into those case studies too. But my model is not that these are demons. And when you get into ritual magic, it's very easy to see that. We have what are called pictorial signatures that we know them as sigils, but they were designed for the practitioner to conjure another presence to where it could incarnate into this reality. Now we're seeing those same sigils on abductees and on demoniacs and victims of malevolent hauntings. And not just that, but also those who've been disembodied. Once they get back into their body, whatever these entities are actually carving sigils either into the consciousness or into the soul. And then when they return back into their body, it's manifesting from underneath the skin to the surface. So that right there knocks the demonic hypothesis out of contention, because our practitioners are carving pictorial signatures for them. But why are they doing the same thing? That would actually kind of suggest that they themselves are performing ritual magic on us. And so at one level, we have us trying to conjure them. No, they're also trying to conjure almost like another entity or another presence above them. So if they're demons, it doesn't fit, because they also serve different masters. And that's kind of why I've been deconstructing the whole model of demonology with respect to systematic demonology, because it doesn't work. And that's the difference between us, like not us, but, people in the field that just read books about demonology, and people that are actually in homes, boots on the ground, researching. You see that there's pattern confirming evidence that does suggest we're dealing with not just ritual magic, but a species of sorcerer. And that doesn't really fit the blueprint of horns and hooves. Now, I also believe that there are data points that has confused me, demonologists, right? Because they see the ritual magic. They just don't have a knowledge of ritual magic. And so they kind of lump it all together and say, all right, cool, demons. And it's not. It's not. So whatever we're dealing with does employ ritual magic, and it's in many fields of research. As I said, it's not just in the UFO abduction phenomenon. Some of these sigils have been carved into craft plural, which is another strange interconnectivity. So whatever they are, these appear to be more like practitioners instead of the actual entities they're trying to conjure.
Does anybody actually really understand how these things are interacting with our physical world?
It's not just that we don't know what we're measuring, we don't know how to measure it. So on one hand, it's okay, right? It's okay. We pretty much got an energy signature. Yeah, but what is it? Where does it come from? This is another argument with the Collins elite, who, have been recently frowned upon as religious zealots. And that's another thing I've been having to do as of lately, try to kind of correct some of the lies spread about them. But in their research, they were taking soil samples from real crop circles in England. And they found a certain cellular anomaly and a certain energy signature in them. And they went back to their laboratories. They began to perform ritual magic. Ritual magic, I'm not talking about white magic. I'm not talking about, kumbaya, my lord. I'm going to do a certain ritual and hope that somebody gets healed. No, it was quite literally, I'm going to afflict somebody. And the phenomenon incarnated. And they were able to monitor and capture the same energy signature and the same cellular anomaly in that experiment that they found in the crop circles. So whether or not they're demonic, I think that I've kind of obviously shelved that for the moment. What we're looking at is the self-same signatures, the self-same anomalies in both fields of research. Now, what we're looking at with respect to our government to obfuscate that fact is in their best interest. And something else that I need to highlight, it wasn't that the Collins elite came to the conclusion that their religion was right. That's not at all what they said. That's another lie being propagated in the field, because if that was the case, they would have went to everybody and said, listen, here's all the evidence, right? It's called evangelism. Come to our churches. We have scientific proof that our understanding of the universe, our understanding of God is correct. It's not what they did. Not at all. They went back to what's called the Mosaic Law, which is not evangelistic. That's keeping Torah. So it literally, whatever their data was, their conclusions drew them to the point where they said, we're going to kind of deconstruct our own theology at this point. And so I don't know what they have. I would suggest that whatever they have is far darker than just believing in demons. It would be something along the lines that we are being formed, that we are not in control of our own destinies, that belief systems are not real, and that even some of the emblems and symbols that we are given do not actually mean what we think they mean.
When you say symbols and emblems, what do you mean?
I've been talking about this as of late on these shows and stuff. There was a group of researchers in Russia who were toying with what's called the Kozyrov mirror. And basically, it's modern scrying. It comes from a researcher named Nikolai Kozyrov, who believed that you could actually, if you can bend matter into itself, you can actually bend time. And so they took this piece of sheet metal, rolled it into itself, placed glass on the inside, and they sat in front of the mirror. It's a modern form of scrying. We've seen that in antiquity. We saw it with Edward Kelly and John Dee. But it's an act of divination, and their goal was to kind of divine the future. And at the very least, hope to come in contact with something, a life form, perhaps. It was in the middle of one of their experiments that they began to see these Sumerian symbols manifest in the mirror. One night, they saw what Aleister Crowley called an Enochian entity manifested on the other side and began to look at them. So one of the researchers decided, he said that there was a fear that manifested in that room, and it scared them to the point that they put a crucifix at the doorframe, and it kind of, loosened its grip for a period of time. Then it got stronger, and he didn't understand it. So he went home, and he had a favorite philosopher, and this philosopher had what he called the emblem of peace. And he placed that emblem in front of the mirror. And instead of dissolving or dissipating, the terror became incarnate to the point that he said it was almost like I could reach out and touch it. They would leave the room, and there would be this kind of black cloud that would follow them around the facility. Finally, at the end of one of their sessions, they go to their cars. On the way out, there's a security guard that stops them and says, listen, I don't know what you've been doing out there, but there has been a silver metallic object hovering over that building for the last 2 hours. It was from that moment, that area of the world, that city became a hot spot for UFOs. So already we're starting to see an interconnectivity, one that is widely ignored in ufology, and that is the divination is leading to aliens, extraterrestrials, and UFOs. So either aliens are being conjured through sorcery, or sorcery is conjuring something else that is wanting to appear as alien to us. The same thing we saw with John D. and Edward Kelly during one of their scrying sessions. They had this ball, so it's like a ball, but it's a silver object surrounded by light. And there were small men inside of it flying around the room staring at them. So this kind of side note here, they don't want to discuss that area of the research because it's the least controlled. They don't know what they're conjuring. They don't even know if they're the ones being conjured. So there are, again, these corollaries between various fields of research that I and others have been looking at. But and I don't want to ramble, but that's where I'm at. There are connections that we're seeing even now in modernity that point right back to the concept of the phenomenon being primeval, being ancient, in that it's worth us researchers looking back and saying, okay, if they've been aliens all along, why is it that early demonologists realized that there were certain grimoires that required the same secretions being harvested by the phenomenon? Yeah, so these are interconnectivities.
Yeah, that's the way it is, though. Demons don't like the word demons.
No, it's very dark stuff. You know, I mean, I can go down through a list of researchers who, at the very end of their lives, they believe they have been targeted by the phenomenon, and I have no reason to disagree with them. The late Paul Eno, before he passed away, he put a Facebook post out saying he started detailing people in the field, even his friends, who had just mysteriously died. He had a mysterious illness or some kind of hyper-aggressive cancer that took them out. And he began to question himself, right? Like, is it possible that the phenomenon is taking out those individuals that are closer to the truth of the others? And so it's kind of self-correcting. It's a control mechanism that Jacques Vallée even highlighted in his work. And you kind of take that and you compound that with some of the threats I've received from experiencers and abductees. You take that, it's just that there's so many data points here. You know, Barbara Bartholic was told when she was abducted that she was due for an adjustment. And 1 year for Thanksgiving, she was traveling to a nursing home and a truck just cut her off, flipped her car, killed her husband. Dr. Carla Turner was threatened. So it literally, this is not me being hyperbolic here, but anybody and everybody who starts to kind of hyper-focus on the darker nuance of the phenomenon, it comes at a cost. Mm-hmm. You're going to lose something. And I was telling someone the other day that if it's not you, it'll be somebody you love. And so I started to kind of feel this overwhelming, pervasive presence around me. It would follow me, you know, and it was affecting my mental health. And so that's why I told you in the chat, and I even went to some of my other friends and told them, like, I'm getting out. Like, I'm going to take a step back because I'm not sure what the phenomenon's willing to do. And because, you know, the three levels of knowledge, the known, unknown, and unknowable, I don't know how close I am to this. Mm-hmm. I don't. You know, I could be a mile away or I could be an inch away. And so it's you just never really know what the phenomenon is willing to do to keep us silent.
I haven't explained much about my perspective on it to you, really. I have had experiences when I lived in Pennsylvania. So I lived in a small town called Whitehall, and it's about 15 minutes away from Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton Airport. And in that area, there is a huge police presence. There's a huge Masonic presence. It's allegedly an area where it is said that the bodies of children were buried underground, child sex slaves and other things like that from the 1700s, things that the founding fathers did, basically whatever weird rituals they did, things like that. A lot of dark stuff happened on the street right next door to me, the house next door, about 12 years before I moved in, a woman was in her house. Her baby was upstairs sleeping. She was downstairs cooking something on the stove, and she went outside to get the mail or something trivial like that. And the house exploded, and the baby shot out the top of the house and landed on the other side of the street, completely burnt to a crisp. All kinds of dark stuff like that has happened around the area. At that time, we're talking 2016, I would have been doing a lot of introspection, a lot of meditation and stuff like that. And I fully understand why Christians would say that meditation is a gateway to demonic presence. I fully understand why other different types of faiths and stuff would say things like that. You know, you got to be careful. You never know who you're talking to, things like that. Because the instant I got good at meditating, I saw something that looked like a gray alien in my inner vision, but like it was about to come through my window. It was just watching me. And it was almost like it was asking the question, whoa, this motherfucker is giving off a lot of energy. How do I get that? You know, that's what it felt like. But the amount of paranormal experiences that I had in that house increased 100-fold once I started doing deep meditations and stuff like that. And I wonder if there's just a certain quality of person that they look for, because I've had an experience where I was laying in bed and laying on my right side and the window is behind me to the left. And I wake up very briefly and these bright lights come through the window. And then it's like, I can't even turn over to see what's going on. I'm just stuck. And I remember going back off to sleep, so to speak. But when I got up the next day, I couldn't go to work or anything like that. My stomach was just killing me. And nothing like that ever happened before. And I don't have any recollection of what happened or anything. When I was a child, I would always have these experiences in dreams where I would feel like a craft would come down above the house, and it would always be the same dream sequence. I would be sitting outside and it would beam me up, so to speak. And I would go in and I wouldn't see any faces, but I would feel presences, and I would be looking through this window down at the earth. And this dream recurred. It started when I was about 4 years old, and it continued all throughout my teenage years, at least a couple times a year. So I have no idea what any of that means whatsoever. And that's what got me interested in the phenomenon and started like taking it seriously. Except that I cannot take it seriously when I hear these new age people, because they're the ones that mostly talk about it. I can't take Linda Moulton Howe seriously. I can't take anybody like that seriously, because it sounds like crap to me. It sounds like lies to me. And truth has a particular frequency. If you don't know what that frequency feels like in your body, you will be gullible forever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And they will keep pumping out content to, tickle the ears of the masses. And I've we've spoken about this before. I've grown disenchanted with the field myself, because it's just, you get to a certain point where it's like, that doesn't even smell true. Like some people don't even realize you could just look a thing up on the internet. You just check it out, right? Oh, that's factually incorrect. Like the date's wrong. And so it's just, I'm with you on that, brother. And I'm to the point now where it's just disgusting to me. I especially with respect to demonology, my first exposure to demonologists in the field was on accident. I went to a Paracon, and within 5 minutes of just asking them basic questions about systematic demonology, that I realized this was just fanfare. This was pomp and circumstance. This was not dedicated to the craft of demonology or studying the phenomenon through an antique lens. They didn't care. They really did not care. It was likes, follows, views, and they were more of like they were doing cosplay, essentially. I mean, quite literally, like plumbers throughout the week and then a priest on the weekends whenever the Paracon shows up. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my God, there's no way. And this is also caused a problem with me in the field, because when people hear demonology, they think they kind of lump me in with the rest. And not that I'm any better or any less, I'm just different. And so when they look at me, they're thinking, okay, yeah, demonologist, take two prayers, call me in the morning. And they think I'm kind of, right, the Wikipedia version. Oh, okay, I know a couple of demons or demonic names, and just kind of wrap it up from there. And I'm not. And I kind of blew through that smokescreen early on. And since then, it kind of put a bad taste in my mouth, because when ufology looks at demonology, that's all they see, because that's all the field is promoting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Preach the callers, and it's demons, demons, demons. There hasn't been a real forensic audit of systematic demonology, to the point where you say, okay, who names the namers? How do we even know their names? Who named that individual? And how can we trust that? And so, to a large degree, that's been a hamper on my own career, because there are people that have shows and stuff that are like, well, you're a demonologist, to kind of lump you with them. They don't really give me the chance to sit there and utter words and say, okay, can I at least build my theory from the ground up before you start comparing me and contrasting me to people who take this as a hobby and not as a calling. And for that reason, I don't know what to call myself anymore. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they are. I do certainly believe that there are key data points that are there. There exists pattern confirming evidence between demonology and whatever we're seeing today.
Right.
And the field doesn't even want to have that conversation, not even to entertain it, to say maybe they're not demonic, but maybe there are some correlations between the two fields of phenomenology. Mm-hmm. Never going to have that conversation. We're the crazy ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Based on my own experiences, I've seen the lights appear in the sky. So I'm back home in Barbados, as you may know, and I live on the beach. I've always lived on this beach. And so just to the left of me is where the beach is at. And I was looking that direction one night. I maybe even told you this story, and I had one, like the stereotypical abduction type experience where there's like a time distortion. My dog was oblivious to what was going on. He was just interested in peeing. I was trying to get his attention. He couldn't hear me. Mm-hmm. It's almost like everything stopped except for me. And I saw this light, and it's probably one of the brightest lights I'd ever seen, just shoot up in a straight line up into the sky. Mm-hmm. And then it's zigzagging all across the sky, doing things that a plane can't do or a helicopter can't do. And then it just goes like this, and then breaks off at an abrupt angle and disappears into the sky. Mm-hmm. And so because of these various experiences, I want to know what the heck is going on. And it's not to disprove anybody or anything. I just genuinely want to know what's going on. But I know what's being said isn't the truth, because you can tell. You can tell when somebody's lying to you. You can tell when somebody's blowing smoke up your ass. And so that's my take on it. I've had people who are for it and swear they've been abducted. And I've had you on, because you're the only one that's saying anything that makes any goddamn sense to me, because the last person I spoke to was...
well, I'll take that as a compliment, brother. I needed that. It's been a rough month.
Yeah, I've been saying a lot to different people, and a lot of them seem to be very fanatical about it, and they think that aliens are here to save us, and the aliens have always been here. And, I don't discredit the concept that maybe there's aliens living in the middle of the earth. Maybe there are other forms of life on other planets that have an interest. I wouldn't discredit that. But where the fuck are they? Like, why wouldn't they show up?
Yes.
Regularly? Is it because humans are just that batshit crazy that they're like, nah, they're narcissists. We gotta go no contact.
And this is captured my attention. I've been looking at this new evolution. This new evolutional model of a phenomenon, I should say, because that's really where the government's leading us to. And I've been paying close attention to it, because when people hear the word alien, they think extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. That word could mean plenty of things, the interdimensional, extratemporal, and anything. And so, but there seems to be a certain model of the phenomenon being pushed, which is extraterrestrial. And those of us who have boots on the ground, and I'm not talking about just studying the phenomenon through history, but literally doing in-house investigations, the data that we're collecting is not confirming the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It's confirming a private, primeval presence that can simulate itself into reality to the point that we're not sure if we're actually encountering the phenomenon, the entity, or if we're encountering what's called epiphenomenon, something caused by the entity. And parapsychology took a big step forward when they realized that even the apparitions were being projected by the orbs. Mm-hmm. They were capturing the orbs, and other people were capturing the apparitions. And it took a giant leap forward when people were actually filming the orbs, projecting the apparitions together. They were moving. Mm-hmm. And so, again, when we're looking at phenomenology as a field of research, it's important to have that foundation, because if we don't, and we go out there just throwing anything on the wall and anything that sticks as the model of the phenomenon, no, it doesn't work out. And this is, again, another thing within ufology. People are trying to kind of redefine the history of the phenomenon. They want all of the orbs to be UFOs in ufology. It's not true. That's in parapsychology, malevolent hauntings. And so when you're looking at this, it's like, okay, I said this the other day on one of my newly released interviews, but it's like, okay, if we're saying they're extraterrestrial, then we have to also say they're apparitional, because the same orbs we're seeing in ufology have been witnessed in parapsychology, projecting apparitions that are literally animated. So if we're going to include those in our model of the phenomenon, we have to include other case studies too. We just can't ignore them because we don't like them. And those case studies include malevolent hauntings, where liquid blood plasma is pouring from the cupboards. And what they're doing is they're just conveniently skipping over that data set. And I'm questioning why. Because if and when they include these case studies into the fold, they're going to have to answer for some extremely, extremely dark cases where the phenomenon has quite literally done things to people without their permission, assaulted them to a degree where, and this is both in ufology and parapsychology, where a ball of light descends down upon a victim at night, and eyewitnesses, that's all they see is a ball of light enveloping the experiencer. The experiencer is screaming at the top of their lungs, but the witnesses on the outside of the bubble can't even hear her. That was supposed to be a poltergeist case study, but it's weird because in ufology, Dr. Carla Turner had another case study exactly like that. But this individual was in bed, ball of light hovers down, and people are watching her. She's immobilized, and her testimony was that it was a black helicopter. It's just another interconnectivity that they're conveniently ignoring because it doesn't fit their model. It doesn't fit the propaganda they're trying to push to the masses. Here's why. Because if you were to tell, not you, obviously, but if they were to tell the populace, there's something here, we can't control it, we can barely monitor it, it's present with but absent from, it could be visible but not seen. Meaning, just because we see something doesn't really mean that's what it is. Visible, something's visible. The it's real like entity is like, not being seen. Yes.
Yeah, it's like,
and so, yes. So we're looking at, okay, is it really disclosure? Yeah, it's not disclosure, my friend. It's truly not. It's, again, framing a narrative in the minds of the population, because if they told us the truth, it would unnerve us because we don't have big enough handcuffs. If we lock the door, they'll change the locks. There are cases where they've entered into houses, turned the cameras off, where the security company dials the phone number. Hi, we have an intruder there, but we don't know where he is. He's not on camera, but he tripped something. So I think that's what we're dealing with. And as long as they push the extraterrestrial hypothesis, they don't have to answer for why they were coming through Ouija boards first. that part of the phenomenon people don't want to discuss. They'll discuss aliens and extraterrestrials all day. They'll discuss hybrids all day until you get into the incubi phenomenon, and then they'll end shows over them. Mm-hmm. I'll even go a step further. They'll talk about the Dybbuk on TV shows, but not the Dybbuk impregnating women and commandeering the fetus as their own biological avatar. Why? Because those cases are real. Mm-hmm. But it won't sell books. It won't put butts in seats, and they can't monetize it. And a part of the field is now responsible for the way the phenomenon is incarnating it, because there's a divide between the real phenomenon, historical case studies documented, and just the pomp and circumstance cosplay cases that people are monetizing for content. And in that gap, the phenomenon says, okay, if I can be whatever's popular, people won't even know what I've been doing throughout history. So that's my point. And, that's why it's so important for people that are doing research, not just to read books. This, again, in my career, I've always been trying to have a balance, at least a healthy balance. You have to have boots on the ground in the homes of researchers, because what we're seeing, again, on television isn't what's happening. Even in the hearings, it's great for views, and we'll have shows talking about, oh my God, it was a great, testimony is a great witness. But at the end of the day, the conversation, the most modern cutting edge research being done right now is asking the question, why is it that they require altars? Why is it that Chris Bledsoe has to basically worship orbs? I mean, what are we thinking here, my friend? I mean, obviously I'm not talking to you, but I mean, really, okay, yes, you're beautiful. Thank you. At what point does that become worship? That's where I'm at. And they don't want to have that conversation because it takes them into areas that they will be responsible for. And it doesn't fit the extraterrestrial narrative.
Mm-hmm. Now, people refuse to accept the idea that the media is a virus. In fact, one of the easiest ways to really come to understand that phenomenon, if you have an open mind, because a lot of people say they have open minds, but unfortunately, as a mental health practitioner or a person who works in a psychotherapeutical counseling profession or anything like that, you learn that when you're dealing with people, openness and receptivity are two different things. One of the greatest books that could explain to people exactly how this all works is a book by Douglas Rushkoff. It's called Media Virus, and it came out in 1996. But, 1996 is some time ago now, and he also wrote another book called Program or Be Programmed, and right. I think that came out in 2000 and something. And Why We Listen to What They Say was another book he wrote, and that came out in 2000 as well. But those books explain exactly how all of these things are propagandized. And I haven't even read it yet, but one of the books that I have on my list is Messengers of Deception, UFO Contacts and Cults, Jacques Vallée, right? And
wonderful book.
I think he's a very interesting person to listen to, because I don't even know if I trust him at this point, but just based on hearing some of the other stuff that he said, I wonder what his true position is on all this, yeah, go ahead.
Well, his library is probably eclectic like mine. I remember Dinah Walsh-Pasuko, when she went into Jacques Vallée's library, she found books on devils and demons. So the honest researchers in the field, or people that actually know, I hate to be arrogant. I don't mean to be like that. But people who at least have a history of phenomenology, they know what they're looking at. It might not be demonic. It might not even be angelic. But there's something superior to nature here. And whatever that is, it's been documented throughout history. Mm-hmm. And so, but to your point, yes, she mentioned how he pointed at a book on the devil written by, I think they were Catholic nuns. So he's well on it, brother. He's well on it.
Yeah. I give respect to anybody that is open-minded enough to go both ways on things, because I was saying this to somebody yesterday, another podcast guest, that the reason why people don't get it is because wisdom isn't something that you can tell anyone. You can't pass it on to anybody. Wisdom has to be self-realized, but not enough people spend time in quiet reflection or quiet study to actually engage those faculties anymore. And that's what the internet has done to us. You know, the internet has come along and it's given people who would ordinarily be called basement dwellers, you know, the ones that are probably somewhere in the basement wanking off somewhere in 1991, you know, coming up with these weird ideas about things. They've given all those people platforms to just talk shit. And for some reason, we gravitate towards, I don't know why I'm including you and me in the we, but people, we gravitate towards the ignorance of others, and that's what we get drawn into. And like I said prior, I don't even really trust like Linda Moulton Howe or anybody like that. I don't care what evidence she has, because in another breath, she always comes up with this stuff. Well, there was a document on the table and, you know, I wasn't allowed to look at it. And they're like, well, so you were in the room with the document, but you could see it on the table across from you, but you couldn't touch it.
What's
how did you,
then, right?
Yeah, how did you end up in that room in the first place, Linda? You know, she says stuff like that all the time, which discredits her, you know? Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, honestly, this field has taken the best out of the best. And at a certain point in your career, and I've experienced this myself, where you've covered every subject that's interested you, every one of them. And I don't know. I don't know what's going on with her. I've never met her. I do have books. People have sent me books of hers. And I'm aware that in her prime, at least, I hate to say it like that too, that's awful, but she had, she received communication, not from Ricochet, but members of the Collins elite. And they were kind of explaining to her, you know, at the height of her career, hey, listen, here's some of the conclusions we're coming to. Yeah, then in other conclusions, they kind of shied away from giving her. But, you know, there are those in the field that, and again, with Jacques Vallée, he's one off. I mean, he's a pioneer. And when you start getting into the deeper researchers, you see that they're more than willing to kick down all models, to collapse all the walls upon themselves, if it can get us to a hypothesis that includes more data points. And that's something, and even my new book, Skin the Crawl, is the book cover on my Instagram is an homage to him. And basically it's centered around the idea that there are no horns and hooves, that these are practitioners that have been wearing the mask of horns and hooves. And this is something that I need to highlight too, and I've said it before, but I want to kind of go deeper, if I may. When we hear of people saying, okay, I saw a demon or a devil in my home, I always ask, okay, what did it look like? And when they tell me, oh, it had giant horns and it had hooves, that's not the devil. Devil's never been described in any writing, at least in the Holy Writ, the Bible, as having horns and hooves. And there's a dragon coming out of the ocean in Revelation. That's a dragon with horns. You know what they're not seeing, my friend? A dragon with horns in their horns. Right? This is, again, being victimized by an archetypal presence where the phenomenon is leaning on the illiteracy of the masses. As long as we think that's a demon, we won't really ask what it is.
Right. And for those of us who controls everybody's perceptions of what a demon should look like. Well,
there we go. So yeah, there's the weaponization of the archetype and what's called perception management. And that's pretty much summed up in that book cover of mine. But that's where I'm at. And my point here is that those of us who are not, I'm not going to let myself in with Jacques because he's one of the goats. But when you get down to the base nature of this, you look at the footnotes throughout history, yeah, it's quite obvious. We could put whatever term we want on them. There are behavioral patterns that are interreligious across cultural. And the only way the phenomenon has existed with us, present with but absent from, is by incarnating as these archetypes to where it's present with us, but we don't really know what it is. You know, and that's a rather disturbing nuance because it's almost like the phenomenon plays us like an artificial intelligence, like AI. And at certain times throughout history, it will self-update.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we were in a different part of the world and their demons look different than our demons, it would appear as that.
Mm-hmm.
It would do the same thing the phenomenon does, but that's the Fae. It's not extraterrestrial.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then you go to Islamio, that's the jinn. They're doing the same things. Well, that's the jinn. And they're seeing the same thing in their homes. So the phenomenon is catering to trends. It's leading into archetypes as a way to manage our perception of it. That would be akin to, my friend, you only encountering one person throughout your lifetime. Everywhere you go, it's the same person. And they're often present with each other. Mm-hmm. You know, by logic, no, that's impossible. All right, they're not all the same person. It's something that's appearing as that, as these archetypes in order to deceive us. And the same thing goes on with the guide archetype. And I've done lectures on it. I don't want to, it's too much. It's verbose. My point is that I think that if we're going to get closer to what this phenomenon represents, we don't need to study the trees or the leaves, rather. You want to study the tree, don't study the leaves. You got to study the roots. Mm-hmm. And the roots are antiquated. They're antique, rather. They're altars, conjuring, summoning, ritual magic. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. This is why I lean in the direction that you're going, and you've inspired me to do a lot of reading as well. Like I've gotten a copy of Malachi Martin, The Windswept House, and the Jesuits. I haven't read them yet, but I have them there. Because some of the things that you say are just so thought-provoking. If you have a brain, of course, they're thought-provoking. If not, then you're going to continue to repress the information. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I did a show. Well, I didn't do a show, but it was released the other day. People are commenting, "Yeah, altars, LOL." Like they have no idea. Like they're thinking I'm making this up. Mm-hmm. That's what blows my mind, and it's because ufology is controlling the narrative. Yeah, they don't want to tell us, "Hey, listen, I am constructing an altar in the desert." All they're telling us is I saw a UFO. Mm-hmm. They're telling us I had to build the altar in order to see it, or I had to go out there and posture myself. Mm-hmm. So when there's only half the story being told, we're missing other context that would provide a larger understanding of what we're dealing with.
And this is how a particular group of individuals always operates anyway. They tell you two truths and a lie, and then they backtrack on one of the truths, and then you're left with a half-truth and half a lie. And then they take away a little bit more from the first truth, and so it confuses people, and that's their strategy. That's always been their strategy. And I mean, I've read one of the books, like I forget what the name of that book is now. I think it's from 1998. One of the books that you mentioned by Carla Turner, and
it might have been Masquerade of Angels.
No, it wasn't that one.
Taken.
I think it was that one. Yeah, I read it last year after we talked, and it made me think even more critically about the phenomenon because so she's talking about her experiences with abduction and stuff like that. She's talking about her husband and how he was affected by it and things like that. And then all of a sudden I remembered I had this picture on my phone, and that was taken over Easton, Pennsylvania. Now that's what appears to be a man-made craft to my eye. Mm-hmm. And it goes to remind me that this is the extreme to which this phenomenon is being perpetuated. So now, is it government experiments, or is it really just some kind of paranormal presence that's doing this, or is it both at the same time? Who's controlling who? It makes me ask all these questions. And then what you were saying about like the scrying reminded me of classified documents that I've read in my research on mind control about the Montauk chair, where one subject is sitting in the Montauk chair and the controller tells him, don't think about any monsters or demons or anything like that. And as soon as he says that, well, what happens in the subconscious mind when you say don't? It
There you
does.
go.
So out from the
Yep.
portal manifests this big horned demon, and it's running around the lab destroying everything, and they're trying to figure out how to get rid of it, how to kill it,
Yeah.
right? Because it's come through and it can't get back through from whence it came, so to speak. So
Oh, yeah.
they're doing these things all the time. They're bringing, it's like, it goes back to your question, who's conjuring who? But at the same time, thought makes it so, apparently, because if you can just sit in that Montauk chair and anything you think of, you think of a cheeseburger, it shows up, you know, instantly. What else could be happening out there?
Yes. This gets into tulpamancy and my theory that, see, again, in Tibetan Buddhism, the tulpa, again, it's a life form, right? It somehow
A thought
gains
form.
consciousness, right? A thought form. Yeah, it becomes a life form is what I meant, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so my hypothesis is there's a difference between the archetype we project on it and the actual independent exterior entity wearing the archetype as a mask. And so in my research, specifically with the ghost of Philip, the Philip experiment and other incubi cases, there's pattern confirming evidence to prove that the tulpa is not just the thought form, it's the entity forming the thought that becomes the thought form. And so there is a connection of consciousness to where once I lay eyes on the entity uses my consciousness to construct its own archetype. I've experienced this. Not that I'm not creating the entity. I'm merely creating the mask it incarnates as.
Why that's interesting to me, and sorry to interrupt you there, but why that's interesting to me is because there's plenty of research on consciousness and especially how we experience a light phenomena and goes into our eyes first and it's projected back out as what we see, right? So,
yes,
symbols have that effect on us, etc.
Yeah, there's a learning matrix present. Mm-hmm. And I encountered that a long time ago. I went to bed one night and I had an entity straddling me. It was in a dream on top of me, right? I wake up and it's my fiance at the time. I'm like, what in the world? No, how did it get that archetype from me? And here is the problem. If the phenomenon can come to us and mask itself by coming through us, it then is it's parasitic and symbiotic at the same time. It's entering into us in order to project an image upon itself. And so how can you disagree with me? I'm you. I'm visible, but you can't really see me. So the mask and the archetype is visible, but the entity remains unseen. The phenomenon remains invisible. It's present with, but absent from. And so if you kind of take that into incubi cases, it's through and through. Now, if we also extrapolate that into ufology, what makes us think we could be so confident that they're alien? If we know they've weaponized the archetypes of our consciousness, they're the thought form that creates the form of thought. But then they're the form of thought that projects the thought form. And so we are interfacing with archetypes from our own consciousness and subconsciousness. And it's that cognitive interface that we have to see through. I don't care what we call it. I don't care what it wants us to project it as. What is it doing? And I think this is why it's diversified, not just why, but how it's diversified itself in our eyes to where it's fae over there, but it's demons over here. Why? It's hiding behind religious tradition. And much of that is not even biblically accurate in terms of demonology. It's not. And this goes back to show us this is propaganda. And a lot of this is designed to manufacture consent.
Precisely. And it's all about manufacturing consent and manufacturing victims and manufacturing these experiences, because even in my work, I speak about how people will develop belief systems or emotional responses to things due to a part of the brain. It's called the stress fear memory pathway. And it has to do with your prefrontal cortex, which is the beginning of every pathway in the brain to begin with. So once the prefrontal cortex deactivates when you're watching any screen, then everything becomes a direct input. And so in that stress fear memory pathway, you have the amygdala, which is the stress and fear, and you have the hypothalamus, which is your hormones, and then you have the hippocampus, which is your memory. So it's kind of akin to the brain being like a tape recorder, the limbic system being like a tape recorder, and the hippocampus is actually the tape where false memories are installed, where that's where the archetypes are put in, because there's been tons of research, even before Carl Jung came out and said anything about archetypes, to suggest that those who control the world are controlling us through these archetypes and just installing these ideas of about what certain things should look like. And so your theory makes 110% sense to me, because that's been the game, and that is the game that they're running, and it always has been, and it always will be, because it's not even, I take back something that I said about humans being idiotic. I mean, I include myself in that too, but it's just, we just don't know what we don't know. Most people, the average person on the street, is concerned about working a 9-to-5 job. Maybe they got another shift later on. So they're not keeping their eyes on the prize. They're not keeping their eyes on the ball. And so when they experience these abduction phenomenons, or, they have a crisis, an emotional crisis, and that leads them to diving into some spiritual reality or some kind of faith, they're completely not inside themselves enough to understand that where they are is a place of panic. And when you're in a place of panic, you're just looking for help. You're in survival mode. And so you will look for any information that will confirm what you're looking to confirm at the moment to stay safe. And that's what the subconscious mind is looking to do. It wants to keep you safe at all times, even if what it believes is destructive or just complete garbage. It doesn't matter. It's about a false sense of security. It's not about what's really happening. And so when you're fighting against reality, when you're fighting against a biological reality like that, how do we even achieve a mass disclosure? How do we even shift people's perceptions and shift people's thinking enough to turn them in that direction?
Let me give you a case study and kind of really, really underline where we are with the phenomenon, if we want to be truthful. Dr. Carla Turner, her son was being abducted, and he comes to her and says, "Mom, I don't know how to deal with this anymore. I think I need to tell you what's going on." She gets on the phone with his biological father, who's remarried now. They get a family meeting together. In the middle of this family meeting, her ex-husband, her son's father, says, "Carla, don't you remember when you had that miscarriage? This woman is an abduction researcher. Her job's not just to remember what happened to her. Her job, right, and her calling is to remember what happened to everybody else, too, that she was working with." And she says, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he goes, "Yeah, you do, Carla. You were pregnant. They implanted a baby in you, and you carried it, and you miscarried, and you were devastated. And even all of your friends," as a matter of fact, she was bleeding heavily. Matter of fact, she went to all of her friends, and all of her friends knew this. The phenomenon blocked that memory from her own mind. She was in the middle of doing research, not realizing what the phenomenon had actually done to her too. So when we're talking about existential crisis, we're talking about a mental health issue.
Right. And now that you've said that, I remember the book. It's Into the Fringe.
Yes. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good book too. Yeah. And so, right, what we're looking at is quite literally somebody, and let's say an old man, sitting in their chair, looking up at a clock, and it's 11:30, looking up down at the book, and it's 1 a.m. One seamless stream of consciousness, uninterrupted, and yet time is gone. So it would be an ontological shock of apocalyptic proportion. And of course, they don't want to say that. because now we're questioning reality itself. We're questioning our own autonomy. We're questioning free will. It's something I've been studying lately here. It's about a spore. So I watched a video. That's a spore goes out. It infects and possesses a tarantula and then brings that tarantula over to its habitat. And when it gets him vulnerable into that habitat, then that spore takes completely over the tarantula. So something needs to be in us that says, okay, I want you to go look. And slowly but surely, it positions others closer to its habitat. We've seen this in antiquity with respect to the altar building. Our ancestors realized very quickly the phenomenon is more present here than it is here. So they build their altars where the phenomenon was. And so this gets back to the idea. At what point does the practitioner realize that they are the one being conjured? They're the one who's being led to the phenomenon. And there is, again, this, okay, build me an altar. Really, I'm building you. You're my altar. You, consciousness itself, has the ability to conjure. And so this entire dynamic, this relationship, it's troubling, but it is fascinating. But
exactly, that's what manifestation is, conjuring.
Yep.
And I think that's why I don't like this idea of manifestation that has come into public consciousness now, because where it's coming from is dark occultism, essentially. And they're telling you, hey, just do a bunch of dark shit and, bring all these things into your life. But one of the problems with manifestation that is common that people don't realize is that entities will mess with you. They will completely fuck with you. You will meditate and you will, do whatever ritual it is that you've seen your internet guru tell you to do. And those guys, a lot of them either know what they're into and they're not saying, or they don't know because they're regurgitating something that somebody else has said. Right. And they're getting people to open portals inside their houses, open up the natural portals that they have in their mind and bring these entities in. And the entities love that because, let's say you want $1,000. Okay, that entity is going to go and bring you something that matches up with what you're asking for.
Absolutely.
And then as quickly as it brought it to you, it will take something else from you.
Yes.
And they don't
at the time of its choosing. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. There's a researcher named Baal Kaldman. He has a YouTube channel, but he does a lot of work, at least research about the jinn. And he's in contact with people who are practitioners. And we're talking about people who've made sacrifices, human sacrifices. People, that's just movies. It's not. I want to have a promotion. I want to have, I want money. I want wealth. Okay, go. What are you going to put on the altar? So, in the Collins elite researchers, they encountered a faction within our own government who were doing that. And not just that, but 10 minutes from my house. I live in Dayton, Ohio, man. They're right Pitt Air Force Base. What are we doing? We're doing rituals. And it concerns me because when you have physicists who are completely just basically abandoning the scientific method entirely. Why? Because they realized a long time ago, there's what we want from the phenomenon, and then there's what the phenomenon wants from us. And those are incompatible with the model that we're being presented today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now I've had previous guests on this podcast that have implants, and most recently, she had like an X was carved into her ass, actually, like both ass cheeks. And stuff like that is, I don't want to use the word fascinating. It actually disturbs me more than it fascinates me. Because these things are able to do things to you. And I've had experiences where I've had like what I thought was a bad dream, and I wake up and there's like these two things that look like a spider bite on the inside of my thigh, or things like that, you know? And I mean, stuff like that's been going on. Well, I shouldn't say it's been going on because it doesn't happen anymore. But it's like I was saying to you about when I first started meditating, how paranormal experiences seem to increase 100-fold. And once I learned how to actually meditate properly and shut all of that other stuff out, then those kinds of things stopped happening. But they were happening before I was fully in control of my consciousness, when I would have been more in an unaware and asleep phase, you know, early in my childhood or early in my teenage years and things like that. Stuff like that would happen. And it was common with us because where I live now in Barbados is it's always been a psychic hotspot. We have plenty of folklore and stuff here, like the steel donkey. I've heard it. You just hear like the sound of hooves and chains dragging on the floor outside your window. You dare not look outside because you know that's a phenomenon called the steel donkey, and you don't want to mess with it. Seen things like, I think it's called a dwen or something like that, but it's a very attractive lady that appears, and, you know, she basically takes a hold of your consciousness until you can only gaze at her eyes and you see her beauty. You see just about to her torso or whatever. But if you're able to break that hypnotic spell that she has on you, you notice that her feet are actually inverted. They turn backwards. And she basically, what she does is she leads you into this cane field or into the forest or anywhere like that. It's a common bit of folklore that exists across the Caribbean. So I've seen things like that, and I've seen like coffins in the middle of the road while I'm driving at night in the countryside. I've seen balls of fire in the sky, which I think some people say that's a hag flying through the sky or something like that. And I've actually had an experience with what I believe is a hag. There's this old lady that she wanted. Basically, my mother felt sorry for this old lady, and she kept giving her rides home, and like she would buy her things like shoes and food and clothes and things like that. And I said to my mom, listen, that old lady is not an old lady. Like, you can see that the difference in her eyes, that's not a human, that's something. And she didn't believe me. And one day I saw the old lady coming down the road, and I was going up on the other side of the road, and I looked at her and I said in my mind to her, I know exactly what you are. And this old lady dropped her cane and took off running like she was a toddler and disappeared.
Wow.
She basically disappeared from one side of the highway and reappeared on the other side of the highway. Now, that's an entity. Humans don't do that, you know? Right. And then took off. So, and that lady never reappeared again. And like a couple of weeks later, my mom was like, I wonder whatever happened to that old lady. And this is over 20 years that this happened now, but I told her what happened, and she was kind of like in disbelief at first, but then she started to really question what I was saying. There's all these different paranormal phenomena, and it all seems to be in alignment with the things that you're talking about, because I think that that's one way that they can get to you too, through your kindness. I just don't know. Yeah. I don't know that there's a difference between ETs and aliens and demons and all these things anymore. I don't know that any of what, and they can come after me with the witch hunt too. I'm ready. But I don't know if any of these experiencers really truly understand what they have experienced enough to be talking about it. They're just listening to people fill the gaps for them, because that's what people do. Something happens and anyone can come along. It could be, let's say, if it's an ET phenomenon, an abduction, it could be a paranormal researcher, it could be a ufologist, it could be fucking William Shatner, it could be anybody, it could be your therapist. But whatever it is you say to a person when they're in crisis, their mind is automatically going to fill the gaps. And so they really don't know what they don't know. They really don't understand the phenomenon. And the brain is doing what it's supposed to do by keeping you in a shell and giving you tunnel vision. So you're not really going to understand what happens. And I have to mention that because of you, again, I read Nigel Kerner's Gray Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls, and that completely filled in some more gaps that changed my perception about these different things. And so why am I saying all this? Because I want that anybody that's listening to this episode to ask the question, how open-minded am I really? What do I actually know about this phenomenon that hasn't been given to me by somebody else in the mainstream? And, question your own real, true discernment about things. If you're an experiencer that listens to this and you're getting angry right now, for what purpose do I really believe what I believe? And just wait a minute and let your mind bring something from behind there and show you new information about your circumstance that you didn't get before. Right. Because there's a lot of shady stuff going on here.
Absolutely, brother. If I may, when I was a kid, I went to a natural history museum. I was on a field trip, and they had an exhibit, and they had this plaque that you had to you would open it. It would tell you everything. They had a line of mailboxes, and the goal was to place your hand in the mailbox, feel what's ever in the mailbox, imagine what you're feeling, and then you pull the plaque up and see if that's really what it is. I was wrong all the time. And what the phenomenon has done is it's limited our perception of it to certain senses. Looked like my uncle. Meanwhile, everything else was different than what my uncle would have done, but it looked like him. And so by limiting our experience of it to certain senses, it's also incarnated through and by our blind spots. So where yet may appear as something we know or someone we know, it's the guide, it's all of these archetypes, but it's targeting something within us that we are completely ignorant of. And this is the problem. Again, just because it's visible to you doesn't mean you're really seeing it. Just because it's tangible may not really mean that you're feeling it. This is the problem, manufactured consent. Even it's incredible to me, right? I'm going to appeal to the senses we utilize the most to interpret reality, but that doesn't mean it's reality. Doesn't. So that's where I and others are in the field, where it's like, okay, we have to reinterpret reality to fit some of these beings in, which would mean they're not invading us in terms of landing on the White House lawn. They're invading consciousness, the subconscious. They're literally programming reality in front of our eyes. And we are not even sure if we have the tools to measure their presence. Matter of fact, some of the technology we've been given by them may also be infected by their consciousness, to the point that at any time they can just shut it all off. And we're thinking, well, we're so good. No, that's a behavioral pattern in antiquity. They gave us tech, but inside of the tech they gave us, it was infected with the real Trojan horse.
Now that's where I want to dive in real quick and ask you another question, okay. Because I'm glad you said that, because that was kind of on the list of things that I wanted to talk about. When you hear people like Emery Smith, and we already know that Emery was Stephen Greer's sideman for a little while, and then, I don't know, he disappeared and came back, and all of a sudden he was an authority, and they gave him that show. Mm-hmm. Oh, I think it's on Gaia TV or something like that, Cosmic Disclosure. And he claims that he operated on these biological entities and different things like that, which I don't believe for a second. But he also talks about the difference in technology that the military has, and between that and what we have, there's a huge difference. Like what they have, it operates at the speed of the mind, and what we have, is buggy and has delays and things like that. And he's claiming that these beings come from other planets or other dimensions, and they give us this technology. And I remember long ago when I heard that, thinking, what is the purpose of artificial intelligence? Because AI has been around for a long time, and it seems to be a self-perpetuating source of information. I don't believe for a second that anybody has really programmed this to be the way that it is. And I've seen a video of like an AI robot or something. They cut off its leg and it learned within a day how to rebuild another leg and things like that. And it just,
interesting.
It's like, that still points a finger at consciousness, because how does a device learn? Like a robot is a robot. It's something that is given a certain number of functions and it's done on a circuit board. But it shouldn't be able to learn, like, because how would you program that into a circuit board to learn something as advanced as that? You get what I'm saying? And then to continue to get so strong that it then went on to attack the scientists that were in the room. And it's not going to be long before artificial intelligence begins to attack us as well. And all these things like ChatGPT, etc., are very, very questionable.
Jordy Rose talks about this too. You know, the building of supercomputers that would introduce a level of what he called the demonic, basically ancient gods that would incarnate through technology. Now, the opiate of AI would be based on the information and the programs we feed it. But if there's another intelligence out there, they could probably feed it some information too. And what if they fed them information they didn't feed us? Then now what they now have are vessels. They have vessels. And that's what they've always wanted, really. Through the hybridization program, through possession and pregnancy, through what I call necronetics, that has been their desire. Not just a bodily apparition or an apparition of a body, but something that has a permanent stasis. It's here. But it's all fascinating. I don't know what the future holds. You know, I'm in close contact with my mentors, but it does appear that society and the government as a whole is pushing a certain narrative that, from my perspective, is not rooted in the actual research. And when you have Luis Elizondo holding private lectures, showing them private photographs given to him by a government source of a real UFO, and it turns out to be a chandelier in the mirror, really?
Yeah, I don't trust him at all.
That same individual in his book told us the Collins elite were religious zealots. But for those of us who were raised as religious zealots, we know the difference. And so that's why I was like, that's one of the reasons why I backed up and said, there's a problem here.
Well, you're hired. You're hired.
Yeah.
You're the resident expert on the topic on the show from now on, because I'll tell you what, I can't get anyone else to come on the show and talk about anything of this nature. There's people, I won't call their names, but you would know who I'm talking about. They won't talk to me. They won't talk to me at all, because they know I'll ask them the same question I was asking you, and they don't want to answer those questions. I can't get.
Oh yeah.
I can't
for
get
many reasons.
Yeah, I can't get the Lou Elizondos, and I can't get the John D'Souza's and those guys on my show either to talk anything about the so-called real X-Files or anything like that either.
Yeah, the NDAs that they've signed, what they know they can't share, and what they can share has been moderated.
And monetized.
There we go, brother. Yeah, they're afraid of the D word. I thought it was demons. No, they're afraid of demonetization.
Exactly. Strange how that has that bit attached to the front of that word, huh?
Sadly enough, buddy.
But, okay, so one more question, because I think we're about at over an hour now. We've been talking. I don't like channelers. I've had a couple on the show, and that's for various reasons, because I felt like it was fair to include them so that people could have that perspective and decide for themselves. This show is never really set up to be one of those things that engineers people's perceptions, but I'm starting to think maybe I should, because there's a lot of garbage out there. And it's up to us, people like you and I, to say, no, there's more to it than just that. The other reason would be certain publishers reached out to me and said, hey, I listened to your show. This would be a great guest for your show. And those publishers no longer contact me either, because they realized that the questions that I've asked their authors don't necessarily position their authors the right way that they want to. And I'm not going to go for that. I'm not going to go with a list of questions that anybody sends me. I'm not going to go with a narrative just because everybody says that's what it is. I want to know what's going on. So I've been blacklisted from a few of those things, but channelers, I've had others on because maybe they're within the friend circle that I keep, and some of the people in my friend circle are chronic New Agers, but I'm not a New Ager. I dislike the New Age. There's something very dangerous about the New Age. It's a deception. And automatically when I say that, people go, oh, it's because you're a Christian. I'm not a Christian either. I have no spiritual denomination that I'm attached to whatsoever. I just think I have a brain and I want it to work. I'm not interested in repressing or suppressing or denying anything. I just want to know what's going on. So the channelers thing has always been suspicious to me, because nobody's fucking talking to me. There's no spirit guides telling me to do anything. Nobody's telling me that the freaking Galactic Federation has a message for humanity and they're so interested in humanity's evolution. Nobody's saying that kind of stuff to me. I meditate too. Why are they talking to me? I'm ready to talk to them if they want to talk to me.
Well, I think that the key to unlocking that door, it begins with the first word of New Age. It's not new. It's repackaged. It's remonetized. And we don't know what they are. We don't know who they are. We don't know how capable they are. But they're constantly looking for mediators, for profits, for mortal portals. I had a murder case where when I went into the house, I got there right after they had cleaned up the carpet. They had to actually dig the carpet down almost to the foundation, at least to the wood. Dug it up. When I got there, I asked him what happened. Talking to the family. And one of the entities had possessed a girl, a woman, a 15-year-old girl, went into the house and killed a lady. And as she was stabbing them, a male guttural voice she was channeling was coming out of her body. Her mouth was not moving, but it had commandeered her own consciousness. So again, this channeling New Age thing, it's not new. And again, I think that's the biggest lie of the phenomenon. It's New Age. No, it's not a New Age, and that's not new. There's nothing novel about that. And if we look back into antiquity, if we go throughout the years and look at cases of channeling, by the time that entity did what it wanted to do, they realized, oh man, even the Collins elite, they went into Sybil Leek's house in LA, which she moved here from the UK. And they asked her, because she was a friend and contemporary to Aleister Crowley, and Crowley would often come to her cottage in England and just talk about his theories and show her some of his work. And they asked her, can you channel one of the Enochian entities that Aleister Crowley had contacted? So the lights are dim, the candles are lit, and there she goes into her session. And she lost complete control. And now they were in contact with one of the entities. Who are you? Are you an alien? Are you an extraterrestrial? No, we're not. "You fools, don't you know this is our newest deception?" And then when she came out of the session, they asked her, "Have you ever encountered anything like that?" She said, "I didn't even know they existed." And no, that's the first time out of all my channeling I got a hold of that. So there is a proto-source or proto-intelligence rather out there that seems to be operating all of these archetypes. And that's why I distrust a lot of this. It's not that I distrust people. I'm sure they experienced what they thought they experienced. It's wonderful, right? I mean, I could tell people I experienced my girlfriend or my fiance, right, in that dream.
Right.
But I don't really believe it was her. So there's a difference between them telling the truth about what they think they experienced and what that entity actually is.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I'm trying to remember the guy's name now. I know the guy, I know somebody that works closely with him, Dr. Schwartz. I can't remember his first name, but he wrote a book along Gary Schwartz. Yeah. Are you familiar with what he's written about the experiments that he did, the afterlife experiment?
Mm-hmm.
Even then in his book, it still turned up inconclusive. He knew that there was a phenomenon that these channelers and these mediums were able to contact, but he was unable to figure out the in-betweens of any of it.
Right. The implications for our species are disturbing. That would mean that they know who's died, how they died, what clothes they died in, what age they died. So it's not that they're outside of the room. They're outside of the whole house at this point. In every construct we have of reality, they seem to be intertwined with, if not outside of that entirely. That's disturbing. But man, thank you for having me on, brother. So we'll see.
Yeah, I gotta let you go. I got other things I gotta do as well. But thanks for being on the Boundless Authenticity podcast. We will continue this discussion some other time.
All right, brother. Thank you, buddy.